Hey guys, so here we are. Why is it called a personal computer? There it is on your screen because of IBM. This was one of the first ones that was really successful. And we're going to take a look at why. Now, remember that when you look at the social aspect of things, right? So the reason something is becoming popular is not always because it's technologically the best. It's usually not because it's technologically the best. It's usually because it does what somebody needs. It does it more reliably than the others, and there's a name behind it, right? So let's take a look at what's happens. This is 78 as we come down. There's the TSR 80, Model 2, and 79. Atari, right? They're going to leverage their name and they're going to say, whoa, we're not just a game system anymore. You can now buy this as a computer, plug it into your TV, and start doing games and other stuff. And there's the price for it. The more powerful Atari 800, um, it had a real keyboard and two places for cartridges in there. So you could play games on it and you can go ahead and do whatever you wanted to do. And they made their own operating system for that. They become very popular because you can imagine if you made the Atari VCS, which was the video console system, uh, everybody's like, hey, these computers can do more than just let our kids play around on them. They can actually do educational things and they can write papers and things. So that's what you're getting to by the time you're to 79. So only 3 years. Only 3 years, all of a sudden, everything is just turning on its head. And you'll see that over and over in technology. You're moving along, and I'll show you other examples. But you're moving along, and then all of a sudden, 90 degrees, or sometimes a 180. It 720. Yeah. Anyway, um, they leveraged their name. They got someplace. Then there was the TI 99 Texas Instruments, and these didn't go anywhere. And I'm going to tell you why in this one. So by the time you get to this point, right, by the time you're down to 79, you have this. C64 came out, and we'll show you the Commodore 64. And if you look at the personal computer market by 1984, so by 1984, so almost 7 years basically, Commodore owns just about everything. That's the Commodore 64, which we haven't looked at yet, but there's the Apple II, and the Apple II had many variations of it. And then Atari, the TSR 80, and then these IBM PC and clones come in and they start to really shake things up. So when you look at this kind of table, you realize that all of these people are small business, medium business, and home market. That's what they are. They're the ones in what we talked about before that are the risk takers. They're the ones that are the innovators. They're the ones that see, oh man, this is going someplace and I really want to prepare my kids. Or maybe they're really young, right? Maybe they're just in college and they're like, gosh dang, I need to prepare myself for computers because all these businesses are going to start moving them. They're the ones that see it. There's so many people that made money off of that. As a matter of fact, my first programming teacher, he was a teacher and he went into mathematics and computers took off. And that guy learned how to program and he went off and made millions, right? He didn't stick with teaching because he really loved programming like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, so what happens is Commodore becomes so successful, and I can't remember if I told you this in a video. I talked about it in class, but Commodore buys MOS computers. So we looked at that MOS way up here in the beginning, right? This MOS Kim 1, the metal oxide semiconductor. They buy this company because Texas Instruments is screwing them over. So Commodore made calculators, right? And Texas Instruments makes calculators. So Texas Instruments starts to charge Commodore for 3 or 4 times as much as what they are actually charging themselves. So another dark side of computing that does not play out well for Texas Instruments. So they're basically looking and saying, man, people are buying these cheaper Commodores that are doing the same thing as ours or maybe even more. How should we combat that? right? Well, how they should have combated it is create a better one, right? Give a better screen, more memory, do something, and just outperform them so people don't buy Commodore um, calculators. Instead, they buy Texas Instruments ones. They didn't do that. They're like, hey, we make the chips that go on all these calculators, so we'll just charge them more so that there's no way they can actually compete with us. Well, that really ticks off the owner, not the owner really, he's part owner of Commodore, Jack Tramiel. And Jack Tramiel was I can't remember if I mentioned this in a video, but basically he was in a prison camp. He was in a Polish prison camp, and he decided that he needed to repay the American government for freeing him. And so he came over, immigrated to the U.S. Then he went into the military, and basically what he ended up doing in the military is fixing typewriters. That was it. And so he started making typewriters when he got out. He got somebody to help fund him, and he's making Commodore typewriters. And then these calculators came out. So he's like, oh, we'll make calculators, so he can see this progression. He's not really on the edge of it like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. But he can see that there's something moving here. And then, of course, when he buys Moss Technologies to build calculators, that's Alan Bradley comes in and shows him this that was in production. And he's just kind of hoping this guy, because Jack Tramiel was known for just axing people. So if you couldn't explain to him what you did within the company and he didn't think it was valuable, he just got rid of you. So that's pretty harsh. But the honest truth is, Steve Jobs was very much the same way. There's that famous story where he's in an elevator with somebody and he says, hey, so what do you do for us here? And the person starts telling him and then can't really, because wouldn't you be nervous meeting the CEO, and can't really tell him what's, and they're you're fired. And they just fire him. Some of these people are that kind of personality. I don't think Bill Gates was that way, but they did say, boy, he told you if you were wrong, he would pin you. He'd be, why do you believe that? And if you couldn't explain it, wasn't going to go well for you. Anyway, so he shows him this and says, hey, we made this, and I believe this thing is moving from calculators to these other things. And he's like, what other things? Well, personal electronic transactors. They can do more than just be a calculator. They can do other things. It's kind of limitless. And so he's like, yeah, let's sell that sucker, right? And then it's like, hey, those sold well, so let's sell something that's like it, except you can just use it. And this is a tape player, because back then, tape was the cheapest way that you could do something. That's one of the reasons why the Apple II was so much more expensive, because if you wanted this, there was that system bus that made that happen. And so there was some pretty fancy technology in there. Anyway, so by the time you get down here, Commodore PET is massive. And if we look at so we were on 79 here. The Apple III is a flop. The VIC-20 is the predecessor to the Commodore 64, and it's massive. And so basically everything that's happening at the home market level and the small business level is just booming. And that's when IBM really starts to see, as a matter of fact, let's look in 1981. There's IBM Systems 23. I don't know if they have a picture for this. Oh, they do. So see, this is starting to look more like a PC. Now, if we look at the price, it's still not priced like a PC. They still have that problem. And so, actually, matter of fact, there's the TSR-80 pocket computer. Yeah, pocket-sized computer. You could actually code on that thing. Just amazing. Apple released the Apple III, which is really meant to springboard into business. So this is like a business type. That's why it looks the way it does, right? We're serious. But they really rushed it, and apparently these would overheat and just lock up constantly. And they just, some things about people, right? So one of Steve Jobs' biggest problems is that he even convinces himself what's right and what's wrong. And so this is getting up there in price, but it's for these business people, so it's much more powerful. And he didn't want any fans on this thing, right? He didn't want, hey, we need to put some heat. We need to get rid of that heat, all this stuff. No. So they would just fry the board inside because the thing would get so hot. And they had an Apple SOS, which was sophisticated OS, and you can watch videos of this booting up. And it's worth it. I'm going to tell you that if you look into the past in some of these computers, and there's tons of YouTubers these days that do it. Parafractic is one of them. There's another one, LGR, Lazy Game Reviews, the 8-Bit Guy, Nostalgia Nerd. There's several out there, and it's really cool to see these things boot because they're pretty sophisticated with some of the things that is on there. And some of those things we didn't even get or don't even still have, which is pretty cool. Anyway, so an interesting side note here, the Osborne 1, this is something that happened. This computer was hugely popular. So for $1,700, you could, and it used a Zilog Z80 4 megahertz chip that really was used in a ton of things like the Sinclair and so on. These people died. You know how some companies come out and they tell you what their next model is going to be? Like Samsung will do that, right? Oh, we're making this phone, and they don't keep it a secret at all. It's like, oh, we're going to make this foldable phone and it's going to be so cool. Why they do that is because they want investors to feel okay. So they're not talking to tech people. You have to understand that. They're not going, hey, look, tech people, this is the really cool thing we're doing. Unless you put money into their company, they don't care about you, any company, not just them. So they're talking to their investors. Hey, look at this really cool thing. Don't pull your money out of us and invest in Apple or Google. Keep your money with us, Samsung. Don't invest in LG, right? Keep your money with us. So they tell you what they're doing. Well, this is the reason why Apple doesn't. So you'll note that they just had an event September. They had another one about their phones in October, and they're supposed to have another one in November. And they don't, there's leaks, right? There's, oh, this is what the phone's going to look like because somebody leaked it. But normally it's kept really tight. The reason why is because they were around when this happened. So these Osborne people were massively successful. I cannot even tell you. They were massively successful. Seriously, we would probably be talking about Osborne computers and you'd be buying one of them now if the following didn't happen. They said to the industry, you think our Osborne 1 is cool, wait until next year when we release our Osborne 2. So guess what people did? Okay, I'm not going to buy your Osborne 1. I'll wait for your Osborne 2. So their financial channel just totally ended. And within months, they had to close their doors. It's one of the biggest tragedies of the early days of computer because they were such a good company and made some incredible stuff. But because they told everybody what their plan was, people stopped buying these and waited for their next one. And the next one didn't really happen. That's what happened to them, which is too bad. Let's take a look at this Timex Sinclair. Oh, I forgot to tell you, the Texas Instruments died because basically what happened was, this is interesting. Commodore did not do the same thing to them. So I mentioned in my class that MOS chip that is produced. Let's look at the 64. If I can find it down here. Oh, that's the SX64. Well, anyway, it'll still show the chip. It's using a MOS 6510, and it was actually this color screen and everything. Anyway, so that chip made by them, they sold to everybody. Apple Computer used the 6502. Tons of people used it, and Jack Tramiel had said, and does say over and over again that he didn't want to win by stifling somebody. So he didn't want to do what Texas Instruments did to him. He wanted to, we'll beat you through innovation. That's the way it should work, and that's the way it is going to work. And so he sold MOS. There it is. So way up here in 82, sorry. So when he sold that MOS 6502 processor to anybody who wanted it, as long as they had supply, right? Obviously, they're not going to sell if they don't have supply. So they have supply for themselves. And Texas Instruments entered the market with their computer. And so that's so funny. What the Commodore ended up doing was they dropped the price down on their Commodore computers so low that Texas Instruments couldn't compete. So what you could get from Commodore was $200, $300 cheaper, but the same basic system, and they just couldn't compete. So obviously Texas Instruments never went away because they still make calculators, but their foray into the computer systems died. Had they not done that to Jack Tramiel, right, he wouldn't have done it to them. And he didn't. He didn't say, "Oh, you can't use our processor." As a matter of fact, they used. Oh, it doesn't even say here. There it is. They used their own Texas Instruments processor for that. He just ran them out of business, making a cheaper computer available to the people. And people at the time were like, "You are crazy. We're going to lose the farm because you are selling this thing so low." But it killed them, killed off Texas Instruments, and then in the process, also made this massive, right? Because you could get this computer so cheap and it was so powerful, more powerful than the Apple II. As a matter of fact, another little side note, Commodore 64 used the SID chip, SID. And if you're into music, you can go out there and look up music, SID music. And there's still people that will have this old Commodore sitting around because the SID chip did things that still chips today don't do on there. And it was very, very unique in how it did it. And so a lot of that music where they're throwing in some kind of 80s sounds is coming from one of those SID chips. Anyway, so what I'm getting to, and I will not be distracted any further, is that way down here in 1984, there's an IBM portable that's released. See that? It's $4,000. Half the price, though. Half the price. PC Junior is released because up here in 81, if we can find it, right with there is the IBM PC. So IBM called it a personal computer. And notice the price range, right? So we look at that and go, wow, that's really expensive. I could buy an awesome machine for that. But it was much more inexpensive than what they had been doing. They finally got it. They finally understood what was happening. And we call them PCs today because IBM were the business folks. So they hit it right at the right time. They thought they were late, but they hit it at the right time when all the larger businesses are like, we got to do things with those computers, right? And so because they're IBM, so many big businesses and medium businesses were like, we trust them, right? They always make the computers. They'll support their stuff. There'll be software for it. That was a huge thing back then. Is like, well, if I buy that Commodore, is there going to be software for it? If I buy that Apple II, is there going to be software? They knew there was going to be software, and they would get support from IBM, and just quickly took over the market. Well, I shouldn't say quickly, but quickly for most businesses, right? So there's an IBM PC. I've got one of these in my office, and they were not colorful. They were, and some, no sound, no graphics. Some ways they were much worse than a Commodore 64 or an Apple II, but it was powerful. It had a lot more power in it. And again, it had IBM's name behind it. And so when we look at what's going on, right, that's what happens now. As I mentioned to my class, why do you use Chrome? And everybody pauses and they don't really know why. Well, one of the reasons why is because it's got Google's name on it, right? We're doing a Google certificate right now. I wouldn't even be teaching that information if Google's name wasn't on it, because Google's name holds weight, right? Google, oh wow, they did that. I think that was IBM back then, right? And so they had that weight of their name that caused us to take over the market, even when their computer really wasn't as good as the Osborne. It wasn't as good as a Commodore or an Apple. It was more expensive, but they got the name. And so we call them PCs today because that's what they titled it, the IBM personal computer. And that's going to happen again, right? It's already happening. It's happening with Google right now. And the fact that everybody right now, Google is the golden child. And I always make fun because I'm like, if Google just takes a crap on the ground, people will go over there and buy it. It doesn't matter if it's good or not. They will do it because it's got Google's name on it. Their certification is actually good. It's got some things I wouldn't have put in, and it's got some things missing that I would have. but it is a good certification. Those are classes 155 and 156. And it's good to put on a resume, right? Because it's got Google's name in it. Google carries weight. And that's why we're offering it to students, because it's not just whatever, and it's going to be that way for the next 10, 20 years, unless Google makes a mistake, and then it'll be somebody else's name. So anyway, that is it for this one. Take a look at the extra credit for the Commodore stuff. Just apology, the guy that narrates the Commodore video is actually somebody that's important to Commodore, and so they did not pick somebody that was, his voice isn't that bad, but there's a reason why he's doing it. And there's some very interesting things within that video that I haven't even talked about here that show what can happen with an organization, or what things made things successful and what things, made it die, that kind of thing. For them, actually, I think we talk a little more about Commodore later. So I'll go ahead and stop this video here and not get started on another thing to talk about.